almost exactly 10 years ago. 10 years ago when my column ran. And I had some opinions about the process, which we'll get into in a second. And then Dan reached out to me to point out that he too is an American on purpose. He naturalized a couple of years after I did. And his experience of the process was somewhat different from mine. Various folks have written in or media to the column, and it's made me aware that not everybody had as enjoyable an experience as I did. And Dan suggested an excellent idea that we discuss that and unpack it a little bit in this conversation. I hope you will enjoy it as much, I'm sure, as Dan and I will in parsing this topic. So, Dan, set the stage. When did you naturalize exactly, and what was that like for you?
I became a US citizen, Bobby, in April 2016. I took the oath at a Brooklyn courtroom next to the Cadman Plaza post office in downtown Brooklyn. It was a packed room. It was a bright, sunny day. You know, I was expecting the room and the atmospherics to, resemble an episode from The West Wing, but it wasn't like that for me. The earth didn't move. I have no regrets about doing it. I'm proud I became a US citizen. I'm proud of my adopted country. We have a deep reservoir of strength, diversity, geographic gifts. But the process itself left something to be desired. A couple of times I asked myself, is this it? The earth is not moving for me. But, after considering it, I realized, maybe it's not supposed to, because America actually is as much about what we make of it as anything officialdom bestows. But, there were a lot of things about the ceremony that could have been better. The judge was a couple of hours late. After introducing herself, she said that we reminded her of her parents. She said her parents had brought her and her sibling from Taiwan when she was just a child, because her parents knew that in the United States she could have opportunities undreamt of in Taiwan. Now, after a couple of hours wait, I was feeling a little irreverent. I thought to myself, hang on, Taiwan has just elected its first female president, has it not? Something the United States at that point had not done and is still yet to do. We were kept waiting for hours. Some of us asked to go to the bathroom. We were essentially told by the security guards, sit down and shut up and wait till the time comes. There were no photos allowed in there. I thought there would be photos. My 4-month-old daughter was dressed in a onesie with the stars and stripes, but like most 4 months old, she just couldn't keep it together for 2+ hours. So she was asked to leave.
Well, that sounds perfectly horrible, frankly, all of it. I can just picture it, because I can imagine what that courtroom would have looked like. They all look pretty much the same. I say that my experience was quite the opposite. I'm glad. My courtroom was in downtown Manhattan, but no less sort of nondescript for it. The inside of the room, I imagine, is identical to yours, just sort of regular office room, lots of chairs. There were 137 of us from 43 countries, as I recall. And we really lucked out. And administering the oath was Janet Napolitano, who was then Homeland Security Secretary. Yes.
You must have been a celebrity even then, Bobby.
No. She was the celebrity. And it was the last time that she was going to do it. She was leaving the post to go to run the university system in California, which she does now. And so this was very emotional for her. Time she was going to administer this oath, she gave a very, very emotional speech, and she was near to tears, and you could tell that she is a professional politician, but you can hopefully, I trust journalistic antenna. I can tell when someone's bluffing. She wasn't bluffing. She was really, really overcome by the emotion of it, as were all of us. There were people sobbing, practically bawling on all sides of me. I will confess that I teared up, which I almost never do. And so it was really, really a very, very powerful moment. On either side of me were, although we didn't wait for 2 hours, Janet Napolitano was on time. There was time enough for me to get chatty with people. There was a young woman from Ukraine who worked in one of the big Wall Street firms, and there was a gentleman, middle-aged, from Peru, who was a taxi driver, and we got chatting, and emotional for them as well. It was very powerful, I have to say. I mean, at the end of the ceremony, you'll recall, they play these sort of songs, America, those are a little, I think, overwrought. But I wouldn't say appropriate, but I didn't mind so much that the songs were kind of tear jerky. There were plenty of tears already. No jerking was required to extract them. But yeah, it was shorter than I expected because there was no waiting involved. And went and yeah, I had a really, really lovely, and I think everybody in that room was very powerful. Now, the one thing that you mentioned that I wish that I was that they didn't allow us to bring our cameras in, which I understand. 137 people trying to take pictures at the same time would have affected the mood of the moment, certainly. But I feel like there ought to have been a camera. They should have put up a camera, and I would have been happy to pay for a photograph. I mean, you do that in wretched. Why not in something as important as this? I think the Immigration Service is missing a revenue opportunity. We'd have paid, I think, all of us to have a nice photograph.
There was one moment in our ceremony, just as we're about to recite the oath, and the judge asked if anyone had any final questions. There was a gentleman in the front row. Are you familiar with the movie The Hunt for Red October?
Yes. He wanted to go to
Montana. So there's the scene, not quite, but it was almost from one of the lines that Sam Neill was uttering during that scene. He and Sean Connery are alone in the wardroom, and he talks about how he wants to go to Montana with a pickup truck and marry someone who used to be a cowgirl. And he's saying, will I need papers to go from state to state? And Sean Connery is saying, no papers, no papers. This chap in the front row asked the judge, if I want to go to California, can I do that? Yes. Can I do that after this ceremony? Yes. Do I need to carry my passport? No. If I leave the United States, can I come back? Yes, provided you have a passport. I'm thinking, wasn't any of this explained? But anyway, speaking of moving, the little satchel that you pick up on the way out contains your certificate. So this letter from Barack Obama. I was looking for it this weekend, and speaking of moving, I am moved by the conclusion to this letter. You would have got one too, I imagine. Since our founding, generations of immigrants have come to this country full of hope for a brighter future, and they have made sacrifices in order to pass that legacy on to their children and grandchildren. This is the price and promise of citizenship. You are now part of this precious story, and you serve as an inspiration to those who will come after you. We embrace you as a new citizen of our land, and we welcome you to the American family. Now, my 3 children also have Australian citizenship through descent. Nothing like that arrives in the mail. It's a certificate with a signature from the immigration minister. There's no atmospherics.
Yes, I've who've become citizens of the UK, for instance. Some friends who become citizens in Germany. That the ceremony is at a minimum and very, very to the point and quick, and there's no strum and drang, if you're German, which I think is I get it. I understand why some governments might want to keep it to the bare bones, but I appreciate having the emotion, despite the terrible songs. But this conversation was sparked, as you know, Dan, by the column I wrote, and that was about what happens one step before the naturalization, which is the final hurdle before you go for the naturalization ceremony, which can be days or weeks or sometimes months before, depending on how busy the immigration service is. And that is the naturalization tests. There are two tests. One is a civics test. You're asked 10 questions, or you can be asked up to 10 questions. You have to get 6 of them correct. If you get the first 6 correct, then they'll stop the test right there. And these questions come out of a universe of 100 questions, which are already pre-decided. When you apply for a national booklet, you also can find this online, of all those 100 questions. So you can basically go away and commit all of those questions and answers to memory. My guess is that if you stopped a person in the street, practically where in the world, they would already know the answers to about 30% of those questions. And then, you have an opportunity, which you have several weeks, several months to commit those answers to memory. So that's one test. I found it pretty easy. Of my companions, the Peruvian taxi driver also found it pretty easy. The Ukrainian Wall Street person found it quite hard. She found it very stressful, I think, rather than difficult. She was anxious that if she had a brain freeze at the moment of the test, because so much rides on this test. I think she was anxious. Obviously, she passed. And then there's a second test, which it's meant to be an English language skills, and the agent who is conducting the test, the officer, is meant to ask you some questions based on your submission, the form that you already submitted, and use that as just conversationally to figure out how good your English was. In my case, she looked at my CV. She conducted the civics test, and she said, "You know what? If you've come this far in the process of naturalization, I'm not going to waste any time on this English language test. Just, you're done. You're welcome. Off you go." How was your experience of those tests, Dan?
So, like you, I really don't. Let me back up. I don't have a vivid recollection of the English component. I do recall a chat with the immigration officer in his cubicle that, was fairly informal. We talked a little about the documents that I'd provide, and we just reviewed them: birth certificate, tax returns, green card, etc., etc. And he said, "Well, look, this is very straightforward. I think there's a ceremony starting at 2:00. It's 11:30 now. See if there are places." There was a place, but it turned out, because I had subsequently, in the process, moved from Maryland to New York, I had to wait until there was a spot in a ceremony in New York, hence the Brooklyn courthouse. I was actually quite stressed about the civics test. So, my experience was the opposite of yours. And, I was sort of chastising myself a bit in the lead up to it. I'm like, look, I've been in the United States for 10 years, working as a journalist the entire time. The vast majority of that time spent in DC. If I can't get these questions on US government right, then, I'm a total loser. So this was the sort of stress process playing out in my mind. And as it turned out, I think I fluffed one, so he asked me 7, and by that point I had my 6. But, I was thinking about this afterwards, and I've heard many people say this, that the civics test, is a bit misplaced because, the average American, whoever she or he may be, doesn't know the answers to all of these questions. And that's true. I do think, though, that a majority of Americans would know the answers to the bulk of these questions.
Yeah.
Like, here's one, it's one that I was asked. Name one of your state's 2 United States senators. And there are other questions like, name your governor. Who is the president? That's basic level. Then there are other, like, what is the 4th of July? Who was the president during World War I? Who was the president during the Great Depression and World War II? Which gets people around having to wonder, well, did the war end, and was Truman technically there, when the war ended? It gets around that sort of thing. But, most people would know most of these questions. And as you say, you get them in advance. They're available on the website today. I checked just before we came on air. It's not particularly onerous. And frankly, if you don't know who one of your 2 United States senators is, then, voting is one of the privileges, right?
I actually think that some of I think that question, that I can imagine there are some Americans who don't know the answer to that.
Just one of them? Really? Just one of the 2? Okay.
If you consider, have been polls, and these tests have been conducted randomly with American citizens, and in some of those polls, 60%, 1/3, 2/3 of people have failed the test, which sort of really stops me in my tracks. How can you fail a test like that? Okay, granted that these people were not given the questions in advance, and therefore not sort of didn't have the opportunity to cram them. But even then, I mean, as you say, so many of I suspect, as I said earlier, that if you stop somebody in the streets of Bombay or in Singapore where you are, or in Tokyo, and asked questions, people would probably get, if they had had a basic high school and education and were sort of, urban and generally aware of the world around them, I suspect people would get 30-40% of them right. The questions like, name one right of freedom from the First Amendment. If you've seen a Hollywood movie, you know the answer to that. What is freedom of religion? So many of these questions are so simple, I would have thought. But I get that it can be stressful for the reason for the Ukrainian woman, because you do worry, because so much rests on that test. You fail that test, and you have to go through the whole process again, pay the money, go through. You don't know how much of a delay,
with no guarantees.
And with no guarantees. Because of the stress of it, I think people that, if at the, this has happened to, there have been moments where a perfectly simple answer to a question has evaded us. And in most cases, that's fine. You can just say, oh, well, I'm having a brain freeze. I can now say I'm having an adult moment, a senior moment. But you're not allowed to do that in a naturalization test. You can't say that to the officer. So I get why that's stressful.
Well, there does need to be, an element of the bar. You have to clear some hurdles. This is going to sound awfully hard-ass, but to some extent, it doesn't really matter whether the average person in a particular country, could answer 35% or 45% or 65%. This is a test for folks who are citizens of elsewhere. Everyone's a citizen of somewhere, who wish to become a citizen of another place. So, you've got to set some parameters for entry. And if not this, then what?
Well, so my column was an attempt to answer that question. But before we get there, let's spend a moment more on that English language test, which was the basis of the column. The Biden administration has decided to make the English language test harder. Now, the Trump administration tried to make the civics test harder, not just harder, but make it more political. No, one of the first things Biden when he became president was that he kind of canceled Trump's order, so shall we say, and put the civics test back to where it was before. I think, and then, to my surprise, there was an announcement earlier this year that the English test would become harder. Instead of the officer, the agent, simply looking through your application and just having a casual conversation, it would become much more specific. They would have a series of photographs or things. It could be, a hamburger, or it could be a scene from an urban setting or a rural setting, and they'd show you the photograph, and they would ask you some questions based on that photograph. You'd have to describe what you're seeing, and so on. Yeah, again, this sounds perfectly simple, you'd think, except that it doesn't reckon with the fact that people are under enormous stress when they are when they're taking the test, and they will be anxious about it. My argument in the column was the opposite of yours, which is to say that there ought to be no tests. That not only should Biden desist from trying to make the English test more difficult, he should actually cancel both the English test and the civics test, and not have them at all. And here's my explanation for why. You say that there has to be a bar. I say that the bar already exists. Before I was able to take, I had to first become a green card holder, a permanent resident in this country. I was extremely fortunate to get that very soon after I arrived, for reasons that we don't need to. Most people have to wait anywhere between 2, 5, 7, 10, 15 years sometimes to even get that green card. And then as a green card holder, you have to have lived in America for 5 years before you can apply for naturalization. Where you came from, the process, it could be anywhere from 15 or more years to 7 years, give or take, before you reach that point where you sit in front for that test. In that period, you have lived in this country. More than likely, you have worked here. You have dealt with the government in various ways, as citizens must do. You have negotiated relationships with your employer, services, with private services. You have interacted with American citizens. My argument is that you've already passed the test. This is the free market. This is the country that fetishizes the free market, and the great God of the free market has already vetted you and declared you able, and all you need to do is then be willing, if you have already been declared able by the market. Why at that stage does the government then need to test your knowledge?
Is what you're proposing politically sellable?
Yes. Well, that's
why.
That's a different question. I think that if a political leader were to make the argument in those terms, that listen, this is what often happens in this country, is that the immigration debate, or what people here like to call the illegal immigration debate, becomes muddled with the citizenship debate. They're not the same thing. Those who are
right, correct,
are first of all have to prove that they are bona fide. Their bona fide is that they're legitimate, legal immigrants to this country. So that's that they have to prove that 5 years before they get to the naturalization. They have to prove that before they get a green card. So this is not the same discussion. And sure, it can suit politicians to muddy the waters by mixing the two. They're two completely different questions. And if a politician can make that point, sort of at that point, well, I think you can sell the idea that what tests? People have already been, these are legal citizens. They've already lived in this country for this number of years. They work here. They are not as those sort of anti-immigration folks like to say. They're not sucking off the teat of the state. They should not be put. They don't need to be tested any further.
It sounds like the person who would be putting that argument would be one of those 2 US senators who's just been re-elected and doesn't have to worry for another 6 years.
Yeah, possibly.
What would be your threshold? So under your reasoning, then, once you've done the 5 years with the green card, provided no criminal record, taxes paid, then through you go.
My threshold is the only test thereafter is whether you want to be a citizen. If you've been here that long, it shows that you can live in this country. You know how to operate in this country, and this country how to use you. Your utility to the state is already established by that time. You've lived here long enough. You pay taxes. You've worked here. There are exceptions, of course. You may be a relative of somebody. You may be retiree and so on. By the way, if you are above a certain age and if you've lived here a certain number of years, you're exempt from the test already. I think the cutoff is if you've lived here 20 years and if you're above the age of 50, I want to say, or maybe 60, you don't even have to take you're exempt from the test, so which makes the whole process even more meaningless. But anyway, my argument is, if you've been here and you want to be an American citizen, that should be enough.
And would you change criteria for getting the green card, given that would be the premier test?
No, not really. The criteria for a green card, I would equalize it. I think the criteria is too skewed in favor of people from some countries, Europe primarily, and far too much against people from other countries, the global south, to use the term du jour. I think I would make that sort of more equal. But once that is established, I think the green card qualifications are more or less sound.
How did you get your green card?
Well, in my case, so I had already been working for my American employer for many years before I arrived here. So when I arrived in this country, it was what's called an L1 visa. I was trying. I was a war correspondent. I was working in Iraq at the time for Time magazine, and the magazine very kindly employed the services of an immigration lawyer to help me. We were able to make the argument that I was an alien of exceptional ability. I forget the exact term.
Exceptional writing ability. Let's just call it that.
Well, yeah. It was so. It was. We were able to establish that I had some special qualifications. We can do a whole show on whether that is but
actually,
yeah. I could argue that square and round both. But in any case, that's how I was therefore put unfair advantage. I was an Indian national. I had an Indian passport, but because I qualified under this exceptional alien category, I got my green card very quickly after, within less than a year after arriving in the U.S. So that was remarkable. I am incredibly grateful that to have had that, and then I had to wait 5 years before I could apply for the citizenship itself. How about you?
It sounds a lot like my path. I had been working for our current employer, Bloomberg, in the United Kingdom. I was asked to take up an assignment in DC. That was in 2006. By 2008, HR had invited me to go down the green card route, and our immigration consulting firm, as far as citizenship went, well, I was on my own with that one. No problem with it, but you got it from here. And 5 years, and then the process began. Yeah. So,
well,
I wonder how representative we are.
Not at all. I suspect the vast majority of people in that room naturalized. I'm willing to bet that the vast majority of those people had a longer and more sort of difficult journey to that place. And frankly, I think it is bad idea for Biden to want to make that journey even harder. Anyway, we've exhausted our 30 minutes, Daniel. Let me give you the last word.
We were just getting started.
I know. Maybe we do a part 2 one of these days. But hopefully our listeners and viewers will weigh in, on the social media DMs and let us know your thoughts. But for now,
we didn't even get to discuss tax. As an American
Yes.
citizen, you have the right to be taxed wherever you are working, like Singapore, for
Yes.
example. It's still
I think
worth it.
I can see the pain in your eyes.
It's still worth it. I don't regret any of it. I'm proud
Yes.
of my adopted country.
As am I, and it is my only country, because my India does not allow dual citizenship, unlike Australia. And so I'm exceptionally proud, and it's a path that I hope more people in this country's identity depends on it. Its economy does too, and I hope that the process can be made simpler, easier for generations to come.
It sounds trite. One of the things I've always admired about the United States has been its ability to reinvent itself. And that is entirely dependent on new and diverse pools of people.
Indeed. At this stage, I think we should stand up and sing, but we will spare our viewers and listeners that. Dan, thank you so much for joining me in Singapore. Good night.
Thanks, Bobby. See you later.
Yeah, and thank you everybody for the drill. You follow us on Twitter or X. At Opinion is the handle. You can find out of our live streams to come. We do these practically every day of the week. Hope you will join us. In the meanwhile, from New York and from Singapore, thank you very much and goodbye.